My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and as I sit here now by the window of my grand old house, quill in hand, I find my mind wandering back to my earliest days back before I had ever glimpsed a single golden coin, or dreamed of the adventures that fate would one day set before me. I was born in the year of our Lord 1672, in the quaint little town of Willowbrook, nestled on the very edge of the dense, whispering forest that rolled over the hills of what is now called Virginia. In those days, Willowbrook was barely more than a scattering of cottages, smoke curling from stone chimneys, horses and carts creaking down muddy lanes, and all of us living under the distant, invisible hand of the English crown. The world outside our town was wild and largely unknown, and to most of us, it might as well have been another planet. My father, Edward Whitmore, was a cobbler by trade, though his hands bore the calluses of 100 labors mending roofs, chopping wood, even mending fishing nets for those who dared venture to the river that cut through the eastern woods. He was a quiet, serious man, with a face weathered by wind and worry, but in his eyes was a gentleness that softened the lines of hardship. My mother, Margaret, was of Scottish descent, with hair the color of autumn leaves and a laugh that could warm the coldest morning. She tended a modest garden behind our cottage, coaxing beans, carrots, and cabbages from the reluctant earth, and in the harshest winters, it was those very vegetables, dried and stored with care, that kept us from going hungry. Ours was a life of poverty, but not of misery. We barely made more than a few pounds each month, and more often than not. My father would trade his finely made shoes to the miller for flour, or to the baker for a loaf of fresh bread. On rare occasions, a passing carriage from Richmond might stop for repairs, and the gentleman inside would pay in good silver. Such coins were treasured, tucked away in a hidden box beneath the floorboards, and saved for the day when disaster might strike. From as early as I can remember, my days began before the sun rose. My mother would rouse me from my straw mattress with a gentle hand, and I would join her in the cool blue light of dawn to fetch water from the town well. The well stood at the heart of Willowbrook, a meeting place for the women, who exchanged news and gossip as they hauled buckets up from the dark, cold depths. I was a shy child, but the other girls were kind to me, and as we grew older, we would sometimes sneak away to the meadows to gather wildflowers or to the riverbank to dip our toes in the icy water. Willowbrook itself was a place of simple, beauty wooden cottages with whitewashed walls, a single narrow lane lined with oaks, and beyond that, fields of golden wheat and green pastures dotted with sheep. The air was always filled with the smell of wood smoke, baking bread, and, in spring, the sweet scent of blooming honeysuckle. On Sundays, the whole town would gather at the little church, and I remember sitting on the hard wooden pews, staring at the beams overhead while the Reverend made his solemn proclamations. Afterward, we children would run outside to play, our laughter echoing through the graveyard while our mothers exchanged worried whispers about sickness, the weather, or rumors of highwaymen on the King's Road. Though my family was poor, I never felt lacking. I wore hand-me-down dresses patched and repatched by my mother's skilled hands, and I learned to be content with small things, the warmth of the sun on my face, the taste of fresh apples in autumn, the stories my father told by firelight when the wind rattled the windows and the snow piled up outside. Those stories filled me with dreams of distant lands, of London's shining palaces, of Parisian markets bustling with color and noise, and of ancient castles rising above misty moors. I would lie awake at night, listening to the hoot of an owl or the mournful cry of a fox, and wonder what might lie beyond the woods that circled our town like a great green sea. If anyone had asked, I would have said I was happy. Yet there was always a restlessness inside me, a yearning I could not name. Perhaps it was the blood of my mother's ancestors, who had crossed the stormy Atlantic seeking freedom, or perhaps it was simply the stubbornness of youth. Whatever the reason, I often found myself wandering further and further from the cottage, exploring the edge of the woods or sitting beside the river, letting the water rush over my bare feet while I dreamed of adventure. My appearance, it seemed, was destined to be both a blessing and a curse. Many in Willowbrook remarked that I had inherited my mother's striking auburn hair, a wild mane that caught the sun and glinted red gold. My eyes were blue like the summer sky, and my skin, though often smudged with dirt from my ramblings, was pale and unmarked. I did not think myself beautiful, but I soon learned that others did, and in a small town, beauty can draw both admiration and envy. I had no brothers or sisters, so my parents depended on me to help with the daily chores. I learned to sew, to cook, to tend the garden, and to mend shoes beside my father in his little workshop. Life was a rhythm of work and rest, hardship and joy, marked by the changing of the seasons and the slow turning of the years. But all that would change one fateful autumn, when I was 20 years old. It was a season unlike any before, a season when the leaves turned to fire, and a chill crept through the woods that felt more than just the coming of winter. It happened on an evening like any other, as the sun sank low and painted the sky in bands of orange and pink. I had gone to the market alone, my basket swinging at my side, and as I made my way home through the winding lanes, the world felt quiet and safe. I could not have known that, within the hour, everything I had ever known would be swept away, and my life would be changed forever. It was the last Saturday of October in the year 1692, and the memory of that evening is as vivid now as it was then. The afternoon sun was dipping behind the oaks, painting the muddy lanes of Willowbrook with bands of golden light. I remember I was humming as I walked, the skirt of my faded blue dress brushing against the weeds. My basket full of apples, some still slick with dew from the morning's picking. The air was sharp and tinged with the scent of wood smoke from distant hearths, a promise that winter was creeping ever closer. In my mind, I was already planning supper, a sweet apple tart for my mother, who had been weary all week. Had I been less distracted, perhaps I might have heard the footsteps sooner. Perhaps I would have noticed the sudden hush in the trees, or the uneasy prickle that should have run down my spine. Instead, I was almost home, turning onto the narrow path that wound through the last stand of willows before the cottage, when I heard a branch snap sharply behind me. I spun around, heart hammering, but the woods seemed empty, the undergrowth thick and shadowed. Before I could utter a cry, rough hands seized me from behind. I struggled, kicking and twisting, but another set of hands clamped over my mouth. Panic surged through me as I tried to scream, but the sound died in my throat. In the same instant, a sack was pulled over my head, muffling the world to darkness and the smell of burlap. I felt myself being lifted, my basket tumbling from my arm, apples rolling away unseen. I clawed at my captors, but they were too strong. My world spun, and I felt the rough jostle of being thrown across a saddle. We rode for what felt like hours, the rhythm of the horse's gait pounding through me, the muffled sounds of the men's voices harsh and unfamiliar. I could hear the thud of hoofs on soft earth, the rustle of leaves, and once the distant call of an owl. The cold seeped through my dress, and fear sat like a stone in my chest. At last the horses slowed, and I was dragged down, stumbling, my arms bound behind me. The sack was yanked from my head, and I blinked at the sudden lamplight. We stood in a clearing deep within the forest. Before me loomed an old log cabin, its walls sagging, the roof patched with moss and lichen. The men who had taken me were rough-looking, with tangled hair and hard eyes. Their leader, I would learn, was Jack Halisa, giant of a man with a beard wild as any animal and a voice that rumbled like thunder. The other two, Thomas Finch and Samuel Ryder, were only slightly less menacing. Thomas was thin and sharp-featured, with a perpetual sneer, while Samuel, heavy-set and quiet, seemed to follow Jack's orders without a second thought. "Take her inside," Jack ordered, and I was hustled through the creaking door. The cabin stank of sweat, stale ale, and something metallic blood, I realized with a shiver, spotting the stains on the rough-hewn table. Sacks of coin and trinkets were piled in the corners, silver goblets, pewter candlesticks, velvet pouches heavy with jewels. It was a thief's hoard, assembled from months, perhaps years, of robberies along the roads between Willowbrook and Richmond. They shoved me onto a pile of moth-eaten blankets, and as I huddled there, my heart pounding, Jack and Thomas began to argue. "We should send word to Baron Wycliffe," Thomas said. "He pays handsomely for rare beauties." "She fetch £100, maybe more," Jack grunted. "We'll see what the Baron offers. Until then, she stays here. No trouble, girl, and you might get out of this with your skin intact." I began to sob, pleading with them to let me go, telling them I was just a poor cobbler's daughter and that no one would pay for my return. I promised that my family could offer nothing, barely a few coins hidden under the floorboards. But Jack only laughed, a cold, bitter sound. Pretty as a picture, and clever too, I'll wager. You'll fetch us a fortune. So, save your breath, girl. No one's coming to find you. Samuel threw me a crust of bread and a battered tin mug of water. I forced myself to eat, though my stomach roiled with fear. All night, the men drank and gambled, their voices rising and falling as they boasted of their past crimes, robberies, ambushes, and the price they'd gotten for other unfortunate souls. Their words blurred together in my ears, a nightmare chorus. When at last the cabin fell silent, and their snores rumbled through the darkness, I lay awake on the floor, shivering despite the blanket. I thought of my mother, who would surely be searching for me even now, and of my father, pacing before the dying fire. I pictured the worried faces of the townsfolk, their lanterns bobbing through the mist, calling my name in vain. It was then, in the depths of despair, that a single memory flickered in my mind like a candle in a storm. When I was a child, I suffered terrible nightmares, visions of monsters in the woods and ghosts that whispered through the walls. My father, always gentle, would fetch a tiny vial from the cupboard, a special powder he mixed into warm milk. "Just a little, Ellie," he would say, stroking my hair. "Enough to bring you safe to morning." The draught was a gift from an old apothecary in Richmond, rare and expensive, but my father swore by it. As the memory returned, so too did a glimmer of hope. I looked around the shadowy cabin, wondering if by some miracle I might find such a powder among the bandits' loot. Perhaps in the chaos of their thievery, they had taken medicines along with gold and jewels. If I could get my hands on it, I might just have a chance, a slim one, but better than none. That night I did not sleep. I lay motionless, listening to the rhythm of the men's breathing, waiting for the moment when the darkness would begin to give way to dawn. In my mind, a plan began to form, fragile as a spider's web but no less determined. I would watch it. I would wait. I would do whatever it took to survive. For though I was terrified, I was not without hope. And somewhere, in the black heart of the woods, I vowed that I would not let these men decide the fate of Eleanor Whitmore. The days and nights bled into one another in that wretched cabin, where hope seemed as thin as the broth I was given to drink. 3 days passed since I was stolen from the world I knew and cast into the shadows with the Blackthorn gang. I was never left alone, not even for a moment, but I made myself small and quiet, all the better to observe and learn. If the thieves had expected me to wail and beg, they were soon disappointed. Instead, I watched them, how Jack hollered and barked orders, how Thomas twitched with nerves, how Samuel's hands trembled when he poured himself a cup of rum. They were cruel men, yes, but far from wise. They drank heavily each night and argued over their shares of silver and gold. I quickly noticed that Samuel, the largest and least talkative, had a limp that slowed him when he rose. Thomas, whose knife was always within reach, slept restlessly and jumped at the smallest sound. As for Jack, the leader, he thought himself a king in that tumble-down shack, but it was clear he trusted no one, not even his men. They quarreled over their loot and snapped at each other over the last crust of bread. The air in the cabin grew thicker each day, not only from the stink of unwashed bodies and sour ale, but with the tension of men, who had stolen more than they knew how to keep. They kept me locked in a small side room with only a blanket for warmth and a battered tin plate for food. I could hear their voices clearly through the thin boards, boasting about robberies, squabbling about the Baron in Richmond, who would pay dearly for a girl with eyes like the sky, and debating whether to trust each other or slit one another's throats and take the lion's share. I was always listening, always waiting for some chink in their careless armor. On the third morning, as I forced myself to swallow the hard cheese and stale bread Samuel shoved into my hands, I began to feel my hope flag. My bones ached from the hard floor, and my mind swam with fear. I thought of my father's voice, of my mother's gentle hands. I tried to remember the comfort of my bed, the sound of the church bell across Willowbrook's fields, anything to keep my courage from withering. Yet somewhere deep inside, a stubborn spark refused to go out. It was on the fourth evening that I decided to risk everything. The men had been drinking more than usual. Jack was already red in the face, boasting of his future riches. As the sun set, painting the window's small, grimy pane with blood-red light, I straightened my shoulders and spoke through the open doorway. "Let me cook you a proper supper," I said, steadying my voice. "If you must keep me here, at least let me earn my meal. I promise you've never tasted anything like my mother's stew." The men fell silent. Jack glanced at me, suspicion in his eyes, but then Thomas snorted and waved a hand. "What harm can she do?" "If it's any good, we'll eat our fill before sending her off to the Baron," Jack grunted, considering. Hunger, it seemed, was stronger than his caution. "Fine." Thomas fetched the key to the larder. "Let her cook." "But I'll have your hide if you try any tricks, girl." They unlocked the cupboard and allowed me into their makeshift kitchen, a battered stove, a soot-blackened pot, a handful of onions and potatoes, and a side of salted pork. My hands shook as I washed the vegetables, but I kept my head down, pretending at docility. As I reached for the salt jar on a crooked shelf, my eyes swept the chaos of stolen goods in the next room, a jumble of pouches, vials, and boxes. There, at the bottom of a half-spilled satchel, I caught sight of something I had dared hope for, a small blue pouch, tied with frayed string. My heart leaped. I recognized it instantly. It was my father's, the sleeping powder he kept for my childhood nightmares. I remembered the taste bitter, with the scent of herbs and earth, and the heavy sleep that followed. With trembling fingers, I slipped the pouch into my apron and returned to the fire, careful to mask the joy and fear raging inside me. I chopped onions and potatoes, humming softly to myself. As the stew began to bubble, I waited until Jack and the others were deep in argument. Then, pretending to taste the broth, I tipped a generous measure of powder into the pot and stirred. My heart raced as I watched the mixture dissolve, vanishing into the rich aroma of pork and herbs. When I ladled the stew into bowls, my hands barely shook. The men tore into their meal with relish, barely pausing between bites. Jack poured himself another mug of rum, laughing about the Baron's expected arrival in a day or two. "With this gold and the girl we'll buy a house in Philadelphia," he crowed. Thomas was already swaying in his chair, his eyelids drooping. Samuel burped and rubbed his eyes, looking confused. Within half an hour, the powder worked its magic. Thomas's head lolled to the side, his spoon clattering to the floor. Samuel mumbled something and slid beneath the table. Jack struggled, fighting the pull of sleep, but soon he too slumped forward, his great arms sprawling over the table. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the wind sighing through the trees outside. For a moment, I was frozen, scarcely daring to breathe. Then, all at once, I sprang into action. I rifled through their sacks, filling my satchel with gold coins, a silver locket, and a handful of gemstones that glittered even in the cabin's dim light. I grabbed a woolen cloak from a peg by the door, pulled Jack's hunting knife from his belt, and ran outside into the darkness. The black horse, Jack's pride, was still tethered beneath a pine tree. I flung the saddle on its back, my hands shaking with urgency. With the treasure weighing heavy against my hip, I climbed into the saddle and kicked the horse into a gallop. My hair streaming behind me, the wind sharp and cold on my face. The forest seemed to open before me, moonlight shining through the branches as if showing me the way home. Behind me, the cabin faded into darkness, its thieves lost in a dreamless sleep. I did not stop, not for the ache in my legs or the icy fear still lurking in my heart. I rode through the night, through tangled brush and silent fields, carrying with me not only the riches of a lifetime, but the wild, desperate hope that I was finally free. I returned to Willowbrook at the breaking of dawn, after what felt like a journey out of myth and nightmare. The sky was still deep indigo, and dew clung to the grass along the rutted road. My dress was torn and spattered with mud, my hair tangled from the ride, but I was alive, clutching a satchel that seemed to weigh as much as my own body. Jack's great black horse was lathered with sweat, its eyes rolling as we trotted up the familiar lane that led to our cottage. As I slid from the saddle, my legs almost gave way beneath me, yet my heart pounded with triumph, a feeling more powerful than fear, more thrilling than the cold morning air that stung my cheeks. I will never forget the faces of my parents when they opened the door. My mother, who had not slept a wink, was pale and hollow-eyed, yet she let out a cry of joy so pure it broke my heart. My father's stern features crumpled as he swept me into his arms, the strength in him trembling for the first time since I was a little girl. We stood for a long while in the doorway, holding one another and weeping, the horse snorting quietly behind us, as the eastern sky brightened to gold. Once inside, I stumbled to the table and, with shaking hands, emptied the contents of my stolen satchel onto the battered wooden boards. Gold coins, stamped with kings and strange emblems, clattered across the surface. Pearls spilled from a velvet pouch, followed by a small casket of rubies, emeralds, and rings that glittered even in the dim light. My parents stared in disbelief. For a moment, the only sound in our tiny cottage was the rustle of jewels and the crackle of the fire. "It's real," I whispered, hardly daring to believe it myself. "I took it from the thieves while they slept. We have more now than any family in Willowbrook." It was true. In those days, the whole village might not have seen as much silver and gold in a year as now glinted in the folds of my apron. It was more than a fortune. It was freedom, safety, and hope, all at once. My father, ever practical, immediately insisted we notify the constable. He wanted no stain of suspicion to fall upon our house. No rumors to ripple through the village that the Whitmores had come by their wealth dishonestly. He and I rode, with Jack's exhausted horse, to the magistrate's house in the next town, our story tumbling out between us in fits and starts: the kidnapping, the hideout, the sleeping powder, and the desperate midnight escape. The constable, a tall and kindly man named Mr. Aldridge, listened intently, his brow furrowed in concern and disbelief. He organized a search party without delay. By that afternoon, accompanied by several men from Willowbrook and a few sturdy farmhands from the neighboring estates, we ventured back into the woods where the cabin lay hidden. There, as I had left them, the Blackthorn gang still slept like the dead, sprawled among their treasures, their faces slack and pale. They were bound and hauled back to Richmond for trial, their crimes too many to be listed in a single breath. The news of their capture spread like wildfire through Willowbrook and beyond. I was called upon to tell my story before the local magistrate, my testimony clear and unwavering. In the months that followed, I found myself the subject of whispers in the market, of respectful nods from passing strangers, and even a song or two sung by traveling minstrels about Eleanor the Clever. The reward for capturing the Blackthorn gang was considerable, but it was the treasure I had taken in my flight, valued at over £1,000 sterling, an unimaginable sum that truly transformed our lives. My father was wise with our good fortune, refusing to squander it in haste. We repaid debts first, quietly helping those neighbors who had always been kind. We rebuilt our cottage into a grand house of brick and timber, with tall windows that caught the sun, 4 handsome chimneys, and a sweeping porch where I would sit in the evenings watching the world go by. For the first time in my life, my mother's hands grew soft, no longer cracked by endless washing and mending. My father, no longer bent over a cobbler's bench, found himself a new role, town elder, then constable, and finally almost to his disbelief mayor of Willowbrook. He was fair and just, beloved by the townsfolk, and our family became the heart of the village. We held gatherings in our new house, filling the air with laughter and music, and in winter, no one in Willowbrook went hungry. As for me, I found that wealth brought not just comfort, but also attention. Gentlemen from Richmond, from Philadelphia, even from as far away as Boston, came to call, some for the promise of riches, others, perhaps, for a glimpse of the girl who had outwitted a gang of thieves. But I was not easily swayed by flattery or fortune. I had learned that courage and cleverness were greater treasures than gold, and I looked for kindness and honesty above all. It was in the spring of 1695 that I met Henry Rutherford, a schoolmaster from Richmond with a gentle smile and steady gaze. He courted me not with grand gestures or expensive gifts, but with thoughtful letters and earnest conversation. He spoke to me as an equal, admiring my wit and resilience rather than merely my story or my fortune. When I married him, it was for love alone, and we made our home in Willowbrook, raising our children with the same values that had carried me through my darkest hours. Years passed, and though the memories of my ordeal never fully faded, I came to see them not as scars but as badges of survival. The gold and jewels that had once seemed almost magical were gradually exchanged for land, books, education, and new beginnings, not just for my family, but for the whole town. Willowbrook grew and flourished, becoming a place of learning and industry, its people united by shared prosperity and the tale of a girl who had refused to surrender. As I write these words in the evening of my days, I sit beside the same window that once looked out on a world of fear and want, now framed with roses and laughter. I have known both hardship and abundance, terror and joy. If there is any lesson in my story, it is this: the greatest treasures are not always those found in a thief's hoard, but in the courage to endure and the wisdom to share our fortune with others. And so, dear reader, ends the tale of how I, Eleanor Whitmore, turned the darkest night into a lifetime of light, and how, in saving myself, I learned what it truly means to be free.